This may wind up being the shortest episode of the entire podcast. I am on the road tomorrow, taking a little trip out of town, and so I am recording this the night before, which I have not been doing. I've been recording all of these on Monday morning when I come in. So among other things, I can take advantage of that last walk to work to try to stir my thoughts around into something coherent, and of course most of the time I completely fail. I've been thinking the last day or two about writing an opinion piece for the local Free Weekly. They ran a column of mine once several weeks ago, and the local paper has also run my columns, but this is not the kind of thing that I would want in the paper just because it would stir things up too much. But the Weekly, it's a little bit countercultural, and the town I live in is pretty left-leaning, and so I can say things with kind of a bluntness that I would not want to say in the paper. Because the job that I'm in, my name comes right up in a Google search, and I don't want to create the turbulence from my workplace of there being a lot of people in town who are angry about what I said and are quick to see me as an enemy and quick to paint the entire organization that I work for with the same condemnation they might have for me when they find out how I feel. I started this weeks and weeks and weeks ago by saying that it is not okay to hate. Down at the foundation, it is not okay to take all of your anxiety and all your dissatisfaction and just create a new enemy and to go through another round of the cycle of lashing out and trying to out-hurt the other so that they will then hate you and cooperatively repeat the cycle. Maybe not cooperatively, but they'll mirror the same behaviors you used on them, and there'll be more damage and nothing to show for it. And what I thought about doing in this column that I wanted to write was to talk about how I am a little bit of an oddball in my family because, I'm adopted, and everyone else in my family had brown eyes, I had blue eyes. Everyone else in my family had dark hair, I had blonde hair, and at this point I have no hair. But everybody else in my family liked to swim, and I was the one who was afraid of the water. And I eventually did get over that, but my older brother worked as a lifeguard, and my father, when he was a child, worked as a lifeguard, and my father used to tell stories about the training that they had to go through to be certified as lifeguards, and how someone would get in the pool and pretend to be a drowning person, and with all their strength and all their ingenuity, try to find a way to pull you under. And they were very, very good at it, and it was a very frightening test to have to take. But they had to do that to test people who wanted to be lifeguards because that is what a drowning person will do. And a drowning person will do that not out of hatred, but out of desperation. A drowning person will pull a lifeguard underwater and maybe even kill that lifeguard for the same reason your dog, when your dog is injured and in pain, will snap at you, and with those teeth that could cut open leather, with those teeth may take a big chunk of hamburger out of you. And it's not out of hostility, but it's out of feeling cornered. It's out of not having any other options that you can see. And I'm trying very carefully to steer around words for think and thought, because thought is just not part of it. Your brain is just not in the circuit when people behave this way. And so what I wanted to do in this column is I wanted to aim it, as far as readers, for the very small segment of the Weekly's readership that are younger. And I don't even mean the demographic that I work with, but I mean, if there are any, and I think there are at least some, people who are high school age. I'm recording this the week that out in Alabama, Doug Jones defeated Roy Moore, and this week what the news is full of is there are people making the case out of the demographics of that special election that maybe, just maybe, we may be reaching a little bit of a tipping point with this imbalance we seem to have reached in our public deliberations and in our community life. And in particular, it seems as though there's a really solid, rock-hard core of people who are white, have particular religious commitments, although even that's crumbling a little bit, for which I am very thankful. But, and the most important demographic factor of all, in my thinking, they're older. And it's something that I've talked about in previous episodes. As you get older, as you get to the end of your career, as you get into the years where you're retired and the world is changing under your feet and you can't reinvent yourself and you can't retrain, you can't just move into a different line of work or pull up stakes and move to another community, the part of your life when you could do that is past. And a fixed income makes you very, very vulnerable, and it makes change very scary. And all of that, I think, is fairly well established, and I think there is data to back up that that is the demographic skew in what's going on in this country right now, or what has gone on recently in politics. But the audience that I would want to write that column to would be the daughters and sons, and maybe even in some cases, the granddaughters and grandsons of those voters. To say to them, you are in the spot of facing the same challenge that President Obama faced, that he described in the speech he gave about race, the one titled A More Perfect Union, and he talked about how his own grandmother had views that hurt him very deeply, and if those views were generalized, would have included him and targeted him. And I just want to say to grandchildren, to children who look at their elders and see this going on and are really, really deeply pained by it, in the first place, yes, it's a good thing to be loyal to your elders, but loyalty does not have to compel you. It does not compel you to repeat their mistakes. And there were a lot of very brave people in the 1960s who made a break with their elders on issues of race. And there are a lot of people now in the 20-teens who are faced with the choice of making a break or repeating other people's mistakes. But I think that it's possible to do that and at the same time to love the people that you disagree with. And does it make for a lot of very uncomfortable conversations? Yes. But I have had a feeling for a long time that we have been deceived. We have got to the point where we think that because so many other things in our lives can be streamlined and made efficient and made push button, that the most important things in our lives can also be streamlined and made push button. There are technological breakthroughs that make medical procedures, complicated medical procedures, almost automated. They can be done with robot surgical devices, but still working out the complication of a relationship. You can't do with a mechanism. You can't do with an object. We have objects that make us think that we can do that. But when we try to use those objects, when we try to have our difficult conversations over devices that let us edit what we want to say so that we feel as though we are more in control, we really only make it worse. And if the one idea that could go out, it's certainly an idea that I'm repeating over and over again in the classes that I teach, if there's one idea that I could send rippling out to everyone and everyone would take it seriously and everyone would grasp how true it is, it would be the more control you exercise, the less life there is in that relationship, the less authenticity, the less that relationship is life-giving. It is when you surrender control. It is when you walk right into the messiness of it, and you embrace the messiness of it, and you listen, and listening is a relinquishing of control. And you say what you're feeling, and you try to say what you think the other person believes and feels, and you get your own feelings wrong, and you get what they say wrong, and something that you say is misinterpreted, and then you have to patch over those hurt feelings, and then they do their best to say it, and it hurts you, and it's all this unbelievably bumpy, rocky, messy process. It's supposed to be like that. And I just want to give people encouragement. You don't have to hide, and you don't have to be afraid that if it doesn't go smoothly, that lack of smoothness is a sign of injury and damage to the relationship. Actually, what it's doing is strengthening the relationship if you don't give up, if you don't withdraw. if you continue through it, making clear to the other person, not by your words because talk is cheap, but by your choices, that you aren't going away no matter how hard it gets. I don't know if that column is going to get written. It wouldn't need to run anytime soon. It seems like it's the kind of thing that could run any time between now and the midterm election in November. I have a couple of keywords and notes jotted down for it, so I may do it sometime next spring. But it really kind of is where I am right now. I think what I have been describing, this illusion of control and this misguided wish for control, I think that may be the biggest, most deadly root of the dysfunction we have right now in public life. I think compromises were always messy, but now we have this fantasy that our political faction can just eliminate the opposing political faction because the devices that we have to make our lives more simple can eliminate all the disorder in our lives. And I think too many of us get to the point where we see people that we know are just wrong, we see them as clutter. We see them as disorder. And in all these other areas of our lives, I don't write in my messy handwriting anymore. I type. And then I can edit and I can take all the misspellings and the mistakes out, and I wind up with this wonderfully clean document. So I should be able to do that to my political environment as well. I should be able to make my eminently sensible and coherent arguments to all the people around me. I should be able to cite all the cherry-picked data, which just confirmed what I'd already made up my mind to believe, and then they'll all agree with me, and my political environment will be a clean, edited document. And it won't be. So I hate to go back to an illustration I've used a billion times before, but one of the things about the foodie moment is that the preparation of food necessarily involves some mess. Now, there are people who have delusions about how beautifully they plate the dishes, and there are too many people, I still think too many people who take pictures of their meals, even though that has acquired a little uncool, and there is a certain pushing back against that particular vice. But still, if our aesthetics could change, and if our expectations could change, and if we could somehow define ourselves around the courage to plunge into messy relationships and to do the best we can and to surrender some control, if we could build that into what we thought was worthy of admiration and what we aspired to, that, I think, would be the powerful first step toward reclaiming what we once had, where our neighbors could be people we didn't agree with. And it could be something that we took pride in, something we bragged about. Our neighbors could be the ones we didn't agree with. And we could talk about politics and not worry that it was going to turn ugly because we didn't regard messiness as ugly. We didn't regard messiness as threatening. And I have the forum, I have the podium and the megaphone of a classroom, and I get to send a lot of students out. I get to stir their thoughts in certain directions like that. And the students are so paralyzed by the fear of not measuring up, and they're so paralyzed by the fear of saying the wrong thing and embarrassing themselves. And so I could get a twofer here. I could be a responsible teacher, and I could also be someone who helped to reweave the connective tissue of community. And with only about 2 weeks to come up with my New Year's resolution, it seems as though maybe my New Year's resolution is just to keep doing what I've already been doing and to embrace the mess. And I think all the people who are listening to this, if anyone still is, if you've seen my office, then you know that for me, embracing the mess is something that comes very, very naturally.